For the next, you will stay on, Joni. And for the next panel, I want to introduce you to the moderator, Kirsten Brosbøl. I just want to see the guys here on my screen. We'll just give them 15 seconds. Good to hear you. I hope it's your kids in the background there, Joni.
Yeah, oh, you hear my kids?
Yeah, that's fine. It's good. That's how it is. That's how it is nowadays, right? We all struggle. Hi, Kirsten. So, Kirsten is the founder and the CEO of 2030 and Beyond. A do tank, I like that one, Kirsten. A do tank, not a think tank, on the Sustainable Development Goals. Kirsten was also an Obama Foundation Scholar at Columbia University in 2019-20. And she's a former MP and actually Minister of Environment of Denmark. And she founded and chaired the Danish Parliament's all-party group on the Sustainable Development Goals. So I would say you cannot be in better hands. So I'll leave the virtual floor to you, Kirsten.
Thank you so much, Thomas, and thank you for having me. I have a huge echo on my voice here. Okay, we'll go ahead anyway. Thank you so much for allowing me to chair this panel of really the experts here on sustainable investment. As Thomas said, my background is in politics, so this is not my field of expertise, but I have worked intensively on sustainability and also for the last, since the SDGs were adopted, to see the SDG framework being implemented in the political sphere, but also in the private sector and in civil society. So, of course, this is something that concerns me deeply, how we can make sure that also we put our money where our mouths are. So this is, of course, something that is extremely important. And I'm so happy here to be joined today by Joni, I hope you all heard the keynote he just delivered, explaining to us about his eToro platform, social trading platform, which is one of these startups that really provide, through technology and through a new way of thinking of investment, the opportunity for many more people to invest and also in sustainable investments. We are also joined by Lise Pretorius, who is the head of sustainability analysis at Matter. Matter is a Danish fintech company specializing in sustainable investments. And last but not least, Sten Jacobsen, who is the Chief Investment Officer at Saxo Bank, is also here with us. Welcome to all three of you. Lisa, I would like to start with you because when I talked to you to prepare this panel, you told me a bit about your background in the WWF, where you served as the vice president at the Asia Sustainable Finance team. So I would like to hear from you your journey from civil society, from a green NGO globally working to protect our nature. What made you decide to make this shift to a sustainable investment startup like Matter?
Thanks, Kirsten. From the outside, it may seem like quite an interesting move to be coming from a conservation organization to a fintech, but I actually think that both roles are sort of firmly grounded in a trend that we're seeing in sustainable finance at the moment. And that is the recognition that it's not just about integrating some sustainability factors into some ESG process, but really now about answering questions like, are we solving climate change? Are companies really transitioning towards the SDGs? Are we realigning our economy in line with planetary boundaries, etc.? And this isn't necessarily always questions that finance sector professionals or even the average retail investor can answer all the time. And so what we're seeing is the need to draw on, when it comes to environmental issues, to draw on science, because these are inherently science-based issues. And when it comes to social issues like human rights, labor rights, gender, to draw on the expertise of those working closest to the issue at hand. And so at WWF, for example, as you know, it's an organization with an incredible amount of expertise globally on things like climate change, deforestation, ecosystems, water, and people working deeply on issues like what does this mean for companies, what does this mean for sectors and how they need to transition. And the role of our team was essentially to work with the finance sector to help them understand these issues and basically how they can integrate them into investment decision making. So what we're doing at Matter is essentially based on the same principle, where it's our vision to kind of amplify science and sustainability expertise, and to bring this to the forefront of investments, either to institutional investors or to individuals. And so basically we're creating the technology platform to allow this to happen at scale. So as a fintech, we are drawing on hundreds of different sources that we see as experts in the field. So NGOs, think tanks, academia, etc., and integrating this into a platform that is accessible and usable for different parts of the investment ecosystem, to essentially give investors a kind of holistic view and an expert view on how their companies are doing on sustainability. So, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk more about how we do this as the discussion goes ahead, but suffice to say, it's incredibly exciting for me to be joining Matter on this journey, and it's really about making sustainable analysis accessible and intuitive to the finance sector.
Thank you, Lisa. And Sten, you have a different background. You have a long trajectory of working in the corporate world in banking. And for the last 20 years, you've been in Saxo Bank. But you also described to me a personal journey and how your own thinking around sustainable investment has also changed over the years. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Do we have Sten?
I'm just looking at it.
Yeah.
I think they're having some technical difficulties.
Oh, right. Okay. Anyway, we'll move to you again, Joni. And I hope everyone who's listening now also heard your keynote, because there you explained to us what you're seeing, of what kind of trends you're seeing in your social trading platform, particularly with your retail investors who are younger and who have a different mindset, it seems, around investing. But I was curious whether, also maybe your personal journey, what made you start this platform, and what are you hoping to see from it? Do you hope to see that the trend you see with retail investors will also affect the way that the institutional investment happens? And do you think that's a potential of startups, and especially startups that are based on technologies like yours?
So I've been passionate about capital markets since I was very, very young. I come from the school of thought that people should invest their money directly, and they should invest in companies that they believe in. Now that very much relates to sustainability, because when you look at consumers and they invest in companies that they believe in, usually it relates to vision. Usually it relates to sustainability versus necessarily, let's say, financials. And when we started this journey in 2007, we really wanted to hack the user experience. We wanted to build a platform that opens the markets, that enables more people to access the markets, because we thought and still think that people basically investing their money is basically a form of voting with your money. And the reason that's interesting, and I think now we're seeing an impact, by the way, this year there has been a huge shift towards retail investing. And because of that, for the first time, we're actually, a lot of the banks are saying that the retail investors are actually impacting the prices of stocks significantly. Now, why is that so important? Because if people actually invest in the companies that they believe in, those stocks actually go up. So they support these companies. And a lot of times people forget about that in finance, in capital markets. They forget about the fact that investing in a small startup and investing in a big company through capital markets is the same support. When you invest in a company, you basically enable that company to raise funds, to raise bonds afterwards, to maybe buy companies. And what we're seeing is, because retail investors are actually now significantly investing and impacting the prices of stocks of sustainable companies, then financial institutions have to actually follow the suit of retail investors. Another part of that is actually really about the generational transformation of wealth. And it's really the fact that we see more of the global wealth management companies sort of catering to that audience, to Generation Y, in their language, trying to show how they are doing sustainable investing. So again, because that dialogue is in the open on the internet, financial institutions, wealth management firms have to basically adapt to the new generation.
Sleaze, is that also the philosophy at Matter, that small startups that approach this in a different way can actually eventually be part of that transformation of the larger market and also affect the large investors? You're on mute.
Sorry, that is the key phrase of 2020. As I'm listening to you, Yoni, I'm just nodding my head, and we feel completely the same way, and it's one of our visions actually to empower institutional investors, but also retail investors and individuals to be able to to be able to vote with their money, basically, to be able to make informed choices about which companies they back and why, and to also know that these are the companies that are creating the type of future that they want to live in, because that all has to come with basically data, knowledge, and understanding of how different companies are creating the world that we're going to live in tomorrow. So, we certainly our theory of change is that we're not going to solve the SDGs. We're not going to tackle many of the systemic challenges that we're seeing at the moment unless we redirect capital. And our question we're constantly asking ourselves is, how can we support anyone with capital, whether that's institutional or retail, to make the most informed decisions? And we kind of see ourselves, our role as a startup now, it's quite interesting, the space that we're in sustainable investment. There are a couple of trends that are sort of overtaking the space, and I think that they can all be harnessed with technology. So the one is sort of this move to ultra transparency, where we're not necessarily anymore relying on company reported data, but we can get data on, for example, the assets that they own, the assets that they're planning on building out, and how this compares to the Paris Agreement, or geospatial data on emissions in real time or deforestation in real time. And so for fintech like us, the question is, how can we link this data to companies and put it forward to investors in a way that makes sense for them, that's decision useful. We're also seeing a move from kind of handing over the definition of sustainability to multi-stakeholder frameworks and international frameworks. So there's more, it's not really up to individual investors necessarily anymore, or data providers for that matter, to define what sustainability is. But we have the SDGs, we have the Paris Agreement, which has been hugely helpful for us to understand what do we need to expect from companies in terms of this transition. We have things like the EU taxonomy for sustainable activities, which has defined what types of activities are actually contributing to this transition. And again, there's a huge amount of data that needs to come to the fore for different players of the capital markets to understand what to do with that. So again, we see ourselves playing a role there and empowering different parts of the finance ecosystem. And I would say lastly, just accessibility. And I think this is something that eToro has done very well, but basically making all of this accessible to everyone, to bring everyone on this journey. Sustainable investing shouldn't just be the purview of high net worth individuals or large institutions. And this is something that we can also help with. So how can we make these insights and opportunities available to everyone? This is something that Matter is working on. So, you can either do sustainability, analyze your portfolio with us, or we can integrate via APIs into various systems, either with institutional or retail applications.
It's interesting what you're saying about that there is a sense now of a more of a consensus around what is sustainable investment. Is that also your impression, Yoni, that SDGs is kind of the framework that is now being used to define it, or how do you see that?
We've done research, and it's actually interesting. I think it's relatively still an industry sort of in its infancy. So it's not that trivial to understand ESG scores, etc. So I'll definitely look into Matter, and maybe we can integrate that into eToro. So I think a lot of companies, both big ones like MSCI and startups, are trying to create that data for users. What we're seeing on eToro, I think, is more sort of, I'd say, free-form choice. So people talk about sustainability and they understand it, but I don't think it's really sort of at the point where it's analysis that's based on sort of quantitative analysis. It's more qualitative. So you understand when you're investing in SolarEdge, which is renewable energy, you really understand that sustainability. When you invest in Tesla, which means electric cars, you understand sustainability. But I think we will see more and more shift, and we have started to look at how can we provide also quantitative analysis on what are the most sustainable companies, etc. So I definitely think that's something we'll see, although, again, it's still not the standard. Like, people look at financials, and I read a lot of financial reports of companies. You still don't see clear metric reporting on sustainability.
So I have a background in politics, so obviously I'm also curious around sort of the regulatory framework and whether you see that there are barriers in the regulation as it is now. And I realize this can be different given the way you are in the world. And what kind of regulation would you like to see that could support this transformation?
I think it's really about reporting. I think eventually we should see more standards around companies reporting about various parts of sustainability. So it's very clear today, right? You have accounting standards and you have big accounting firms, and every company really has to have their accounts in place, right? But there's no standards yet that are clear for sustainability reporting. And by the way, sustainability is also about diversity and equality. And I think the more we'll see standards around reporting on sustainability, it'll become easier also to sort of analyze companies and invest based on sustainability.
Lisa?
I couldn't agree more, actually. And it's encouraging to see the types of regulations that are coming out to support sustainable finance and reporting on sustainability in the EU, at least, and around the world. So under the Sustainable Finance Action Plan, basically the taxonomy I mentioned defines sustainable activities. Investors will have to report how aligned their portfolios are with these activities, or at least what proportion of their portfolios are aligned with these activities. And eventually companies will have to report a year later, unfortunately, but eventually will have to report in a uniform way across these activities. So I do hope, Yoni, that we are moving to a point where we will have comparable and robust reporting and data from companies. And hopefully even moving to a point where this is kind of done in an open source infrastructure, where there's some sort of data platform or repository that anyone can access, that should be open source, and hopefully that can be verified, so that data quality should never really be a barrier to this anymore, and I hope that we move in that way. Globally, there are also a number of sustainability taxonomies being discussed at the moment, and so it's my hope that these are to some extent at least aligned, even if they're not 100% aligned, in the sense that we can't necessarily have the same thresholds in developed, in Asia or other emerging markets as we do here in Europe, and to at least have the same infrastructure or set of criteria that we're expecting companies to report on and to move on and progress on.
Thank you both so much. Unfortunately, our time is up, but thank you for presenting us with two really concrete examples of how tech startups can really help us push this trend forward. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.